had a lot of expectations for Not Me going into it, and the show pretty much exceeded all of them. So I don't consider Not Me a perfect show. It would be hard for me to because there is only 2 shows that I graded 10 out of 10 and that I consider perfect. And that's I Told Sunset About You, I have a full video on it, and Project Test Skate or Souls that's literally changed my entire life. That being said, while perfection sure is nice, it's really not what I want the most out of a show. What I want is a show that is boundary pushing and innovative, that captivates me and that touches my heart. And Not Me absolutely did that and much more. In full transparency, I have never cried harder in front of a TV show ending than I did for Not Me. It's been over 2 weeks when this video is coming out and I'm still crying about it. Because this show, despite the struggles it has known, its complete lack of promotion by GMMTV, its rushed airing, its small budget, despite all of that, this show has managed to create a very strong story and is in fact, warning for bold claims that I wholeheartedly believe in, the most important Thai drama ever produced. So let's start because I have a lot of things to say. And of course there will be spoilers for the entire show, so I really recommend you watch it before watching this video. Let's go! When BL becomes political. So surprisingly, when I started watching Thai dramas, I quickly realized that corruption was a recurring theme in a lot of them. Much more than in series from any other country I've watched, which is something I will make a video about extremely soon. But in a country with so many issues with corruption itself, it's no wonder that Thai dramas would be a reflection of the reality that their viewers go through. But Not Me takes this a lot further than any other show though, because corruption isn't just one of the storylines of the show, but is actually its main theme. I still remember how innocent I was going into this show thinking it was about some petty criminals, only for me to realize one episode in that it's about queer men literally being vigilantes who fight against an evil politician. Like, the fact that this show was even made in the first place is a true miracle, especially since some scenes had to be cut for it to air as we saw it. Frankly, knowing Millie, one of the biggest Thai artists, got fined by the government for criticizing them on Twitter, for the first couple of episodes I was legitimately scared it would get pulled off the air. Thankfully it didn't, but I think that gives us context of how risky this all was. And what I love about this show is that it's talking about issues as they're happening in Thailand. No less than 2 years ago, Thai students were making international headlines for protesting their unfair political regime. So to have a show recreate protest scenes like these, using real protesters nonetheless, and even taking inspiration from real-life events for the final protest scene of the show, it really means a lot. An aspect I also really enjoyed is seeing characters debate and disagree, notably Sean and White or Graham and Noosh, who were an infinitely better ship than Graham Eugene in my opinion, but I'll touch up on that later on. For having watched this 3 hours long interview of Pinucci, the director, and the 2 screenwriters, which I will link below, it's very clear they wanted to recreate the reality of politics. Not everyone agrees on what the best course of action should be, and I really enjoyed seeing that be a central part of the show. I also like that the show discussed important political concepts that really happen in Thailand in the low classroom scenes with mostly the character of Graham. I thought it was a really good introduction to these kinds of academic concepts, and those scenes seemed especially meant for the Thai public who definitely knows the injustices they're going through, but might not be able to put these specific words on it. My favorite aspect of course is how morally grey every character is, especially Tawi and Todd. Tawi only appears in a handful of scenes and never loses his cool in any of them. In fact, even in front of us, the viewers, he still has this politician image of someone who's in control, even when we know him to be corrupt and a drug lord on top of it all. Todd being basically the same guy as Tawi, only waiting for him to fall so he can take his place, was also a really nice plot twist. Even when everyone and their mother had guessed since day one that Todd was shady as hell. Todd in particular is an extremely interesting character, and the dichotomy between him caring for Black and being rotten to his core was super enticing. The character of Dan is also extremely important, especially with the betrayal he's forced to make in episode 13. Because Dan is truly the character who represents the average Thai citizen who's aware of the inequalities that are going on, but still believes that a higher good will triumph, even if he does nothing. And the viewer empathizes with Dan through the character of White, who clearly used to be like him at the beginning of the show. And Dan is given a redemption because he's not all good or all bad, like every other character of the show. Despite its very political theme, the show doesn't really condemn anyone, but treats more the unfairness happening as a problem to solve on which everyone has a different view on, which is essentially what politics are, not only in Thailand but in the whole world. And the show is clearly not just saying things. It had artists like Rap Against Dictatorship, as I said, real protesters. It recreated a scene where men that were unfairly arrested were rescued by a crowd of protesters in the final episode. And now the Not Me director and screenwriters are going to be speaking at an Amnesty International conference about activists who mysteriously disappear in Thailand. It's obvious that not only have the screenwriters done actual research and wanted to put a very clear message in the show, but the show is already having an impact on Thai society. So to conclude this point, if you've watched my other review videos for I Told Sunset About You, True Will Be Free and Theory of Love, you know that something I uploaded in all of these shows was the fact that they took risks. And in the case of Not Me, the risk truly was on a whole other level because no other Thai show has ever gone there. As I said, it's already a miracle that that show got made in the first place, once the screenwriters decided to adapt the original novel into a political drama, which it really wasn't prior to that decision. So once again, risk-taking does win in my book. As I said, I don't consider Not Me perfect in any way, but in terms of being boundary-pushing and having genuinely the most important message a Thai show has ever had, yup, tag Not Me's it. The acting. So it goes without saying to anyone who has watched the show that Not Me is one of the best acted GMMTV shows, and frankly Thai dramas ever, period. So let's do a quick roundup, shall we? Firstly, we have Ganatapan, already a very beloved actor who's considered one of the best Thai actors out there. And yup, that is totally justified. He didn't miss in this show, but again, when does he? This role was truly the best I've seen him in though, not only in terms of likability, because White is by far his most likable character in my opinion, but also in terms of the differences he managed to give Black and White so they genuinely feel like two different characters. Then we have the true revelation of this show for most people, which is the love of my life of Jongpon. I've been saying for years that he's incredible, but it was so nice to see the rest of the fandom realize that as well. Sean truly is the performance that has pushed off over the edge to become one of the best GMMTV actors, and I love him for it. Not only has he cried more as Sean than all of his other roles combined, but he managed to play this very complex and layered character to perfection. Truly the standout performance from this show for me. Then there's first Kanapan, whom I've been a fan of since his first role in Wake Up Shani. He had already proven how good of an actor he is in The Shipper and even Blacklist, but this performance was in an actual good show for once, so he really killed it. The danyok betrayal scene in episode 13, literally a masterpiece in terms of acting. Then there's Flu Gawin, for whom this role has definitely been the most challenging he's had yet, and he did great. I do personally think he still has a lot of great potential and growth in front of him, but Dan was a great character for him to play and get his foot truly out the door. Then we have the second love of my life, Montana Chai, who was great in everything he did, even though as we'll see later I do have issues with his character and storyline. But from the same 3-hour interview that I'll probably keep referring to, Pinucci, the director, said herself that Mon was actually the actor who had to do the least acting training because he got it right from the start. And honestly, that's not surprising because he's an insanely strong actor. And then of course I have to talk about Todd, aka Singarit, who is an actor I personally respect a lot because he's managed to completely break out of that BL and comedic image that he had after Lovesick, and now actually gets some of the best roles at GMMTV. He had already proven his acting potential in shows like The Gifted and Who Are You, but here his performance was truly incredible, especially considering how short his appearances on the show were. Then we have Film Rachanan, an actress that I admire a whole lot because she clearly seems to want to push herself in interesting roles. I personally think she was amazing, even though I'm not a fan of the Graham Eugene storyline, and she's frankly the newish Thai actress I have the most expectations for because she's not only really good despite being a newbie, but as I said, she's willing to take on difficult roles. I hope she'll go very far. Then we have Lukjan Basidi, the true newbie of the show. And for her first role, she was honestly really solid, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of her. And then we have Papeng Plompiria, who plays Kompa, the guardian and father figure of the gang. And I think he was honestly perfect as him. You even forgot that Off, who plays Sean, is actually 3 whole years older than him. And even though he only had one more emotional scene, frankly he slayed. Those tears wrecked me. Thanks for asking. For all of the other actors, be it Tawi, Teshit, or Black and White's parents, once again I didn't spot one bad performance. Truly a 10 out of 10 in that aspect. The characters. Then to go hand in hand with the acting, we have of course the characters. I'm gonna be honest, I actually think it's hard to make truly terrible characters. Most of the time, and even in the most mediocre shows I watch, the characters are at the very least alright. But to make characters that truly stand out and frankly cannot be replicated is what's truly hard. And Not Me does it with quite a few characters. Let's start with my favorite, and it's of course Sean. And I know what you're gonna tell me.
Of course Sean is your favorite since you're an off stan.
But actually Sean was far from my favorite character in the first couple of episodes. While I did anticipate liking Not Me and Sean White as a ship at the very least as much, if not more than Theory of Love and Kai Third, I genuinely thought there was no way I could like Sean more than I love Kai, my favorite character of all time. And turns out, I still can't choose between Sean and Kai because they're both my babies, but I truly consider Sean to be the most interesting and layered character I've ever seen. Sean is an extremely paradoxical character. He's rough but also very soft, mature and smart but also dumb and childish, and all of these aspects make him feel so real. He's also a trauma factory, poor baby. He's literally the punching bag of the show, so I feel like it's impossible not to like him. You just want to see the poor dude succeed. And he has so much material with just this one character that he could frankly carry 2 extra Not Me seasons all by himself. He's just incredible, and I'm so happy my man of Jompon got to play him because he truly did him more than justice. He was made to play Sean. I also love that for once, the love interest in a BL is developed as much as his boyfriend, if not more. Here, despite the show being presented as White's story from the beginning, it really becomes both his and Sean's story as the episodes go by, and it was truly great because it made the viewer care so much more about the characters and their relationship than if Sean had ended up being a barely distinct, boring and perfect main character. Then there's my second baby and Sean's best friend, Yok. Yok is such a fun character because contrarily to Sean, he feels like he doesn't quite exist in real life. Yok is this flirty, unhinged, artistic and romantic character that truly feels like he comes right out of a cartoon, but he works so well. And it's all down to First Kanapan's amazing performance, who was perfect at mixing both lighthearted and emotional performances, and still made Yok feel very much grounded in reality. Then I guess if we're doing a rundown of the characters in order of my love for them, we have White. White is just a perfect protagonist because he's so relatable. As I said, he's actually my favorite character Gunn has ever played because he has this inherent goodness to him, a vulnerability to his character that I really adore. And just like Sean, he's very layered and complex, which makes both him and Sean work wonderfully as a team and as soulmates down the line. Then we have Dan, who clearly lost some points for me towards the end, but is definitely the most interesting character of the show after Sean in my opinion. As I said, Dan really represents the average Thai citizen, who is aware of the unfairness of their government, but can't do much about it. His betrayal of the gang, which we will talk about later, was so integral to the message of the show, and he really is so interesting and worth exploring as a character. Honestly, ships and other characters aside, I'd watch a bromance show of Sean and Dan trying to mend their relationship because these two are trauma centrals for real, and I love them for it. Then next we have my girl Namo, of course. It's funny because frankly Namo isn't that integral to the plot at all. In fact, you could remove her character from the show with barely any changes and it would actually allow more screen time for other storylines that didn't get enough. Yet, I don't want that to happen. Like, while I think that the whole storyline of her getting her heart broken by Sean was kinda random and not the most important, I absolutely love Namo as a character. I also think her sort of protective and caring friendship she has with Sean was really beautiful and important to witness. And I love that her friendship with Yo and even potentially with Eugene was developed as well. For me, her storyline was really about her growing into herself and discovering a passion for activism, which I absolutely love for her. And I want to talk about the fact that in this show, none of the female characters, who yes have very limited screen time because this is still a BL, feel like plot devices like they usually do. In most BL shows, women are just there to uplift the men's storyline. Yet here the 3 female characters had their own passions and motivations, and you could easily imagine their lives outside of the show. It's something I really appreciated. Next we have Black, who contrarily to Namo and the other girlies, is mostly a plot device actually. And I love that decision. So Black was a fan favorite way before the show even started airing. The idea of this little gremlin of a man being heartless and taking down men twice his size was in fact very iconic for most fans of the show. Personally, I'm a little harder to convince before I've seen the character, and especially since the portrait the other characters of the show made of Black before he came back to life wasn't the most flattering. So I must admit that when Black appeared and treated both his brother and Sean like flying garbage, I was full on the Black hate train. But as time passed, I started seeing some funny sides of him, and I especially started to appreciate him as the plot device, life-saving brother that he is. I think the reason I appreciated Black as much as I did in the end is because he's not very developed, and so most of his personality is left up to imagination. It would have been very annoying for Black to steal the spotlight from White and Sean when he arrived, which would have had to happen because he only had very few episodes to be developed. So I really liked the direction he had as a character, and I gotta say that I really like him. Though of course if Graham Black had been explored, my opinion would have been probably different, as his whole character arc would have been different as well. Speaking of plot devices, here's another one I love, Goompa. So Goompa's whole character is being this parental figure to the gang, and he does so wonderfully. But I also really appreciated his little test that showed his slightly unhinged personality and the little cutaway moments that showed how sassy and fun he actually is. Once again, Goompa is a character that didn't overstay his welcome. And with how dense the show was, he couldn't really be developed in any satisfying way. So I actually like that he stayed the full-on mystery until the very end. Why did he decide to help a bunch of 20-years-old do crime? Why didn't he join the missions? Was the garage even a lucrative endeavor, since there doesn't seem to be any client like ever? These are questions that we have to answer ourselves. And honestly, I kinda love that. Another plot device, but also not, is absolutely Todd, who really grew on me in the later episodes, mostly due to Singarit's amazing performance as him. Todd is like the villain that you can't help but stan, because he's not so secretly in love with his ex-best friend turned enemy, and I live for every second of that. Also, I feel like Todd as a character is so interesting to show how a capitalistic mindset affects someone who has power, and he was a super important and compelling character to have on the show. Another small character who's my favorite is Noosh. Not only is she smart, sassy, and fun to be around, but I really enjoyed every scene she was in. Once again, she felt like a full-fledged character who had a whole life outside of the show despite her small screen time. And I loved her banter with Graham, and I love that she represented the more lawful and, let's be honest, rightist side in her arguments with Graham. Speaking of Graham, let's talk about my sweet baby Graham. He was an instantly beloved character of the show due to Montanucci's blistering hotness, as well as the fact that Graham is a fucking cutie. That being said, this changed pretty quickly when halfway through the show, Graham started being completely detached from the rest of the gang to go pursue Eugene. And yeah, no one was a fan of that, and neither was I. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really care for Graham Black, since once again it's hard to care for a ship I've never seen and know nothing about, but I really think that the whole direction for Graham's character went sideways. Firstly, there were moments that clearly meant to make us believe that Graham was in love with Black. White finding that wrong card, and even that moment that was just so gay for no reason considering who Graham ends up with. And I wholeheartedly believe that Graham Black didn't happen because GMMTV executives didn't want to have another pairing with Gun in the same show where there's an Afghan pairing, which I'm telling you right now as an Afghan stan is bullshit. But even if we get past all of that Graham Black debacle, firstly, Graham's character was completely useless for most of the show. A lot of us believed that they were slowly making Graham pull away from the gang, so something could happen to him to bring the gang together. But nope. Graham feels like a stranger for most of the show, which is so startling considering he was Watt's real introduction to the gang, and so compelling in the first few episodes. Yet halfway through the show he could entirely be removed from it, and again it would almost exactly stay the same. I wish they'd given Graham something to do other than pursuing Eugene, because every other character had another storyline than their romantic pairing, except Graham. Also, it was just weird to not have any Graham and Black friendship moments when the show had built them up as the closest friends in the whole show from the beginning. And finally, the decision to pursue Eugene wasn't the best. I feel the need to preface that I have nothing against straight ships in BL shows, because I know some fans will just fast forward those storylines because they only care about the gays, but frankly here it's just that Graham and Eugene feel so forced. Firstly, Eugene looks uncomfortable for more than half of their interactions, but also it feels weird that Graham would go after his best friend's girlfriend like that, especially when it feels like Black still loves Eugene when he returns. And frankly, if Montanucci, who has chemistry with literally everyone, managed to look awkward with film, that just says a lot. If the screenwriters had wanted to put Graham in a straight relationship for diversity like they claimed, which is a little weird considering they made an LGBTQ+ character in a queer relationship in a novel be read as straight in the series. But anyways, they should have paired him with Noosh in my opinion. Not only did these two have so much more banter and chemistry, because they literally flirted all the time, but having a trans woman get a love story would have been a lot more groundbreaking and diverse than whatever Graham Eugene was. Especially considering that one, trans women in Thai dramas very rarely, if ever, get love stories instead of being the punching bag, and two, the director herself is a trans woman. That being said, I do think there are a lot of good points that Graham has, and it's frankly mostly down to Mon's great performance. But yeah, I wish he would have been better written because he definitely pales in comparison to the other members of the gang. And finally, Eugene. I'm not putting her last because I dislike her, I just find that like Graham, she was done quite wrong. Eugene is kind of a plot device, but also not, because she's the most developed female character of the show. We saw her dancing quite a lot, and we can see that she's passionate about activism and is also quite strong-headed because she doesn't want her life to revolve around Black. That being said, once again her pairing with Graham feels very random, and those reduce her character to a pointless love interest in a way. Either she should have ended up with Black, but in a way I don't want that because I love the idea of Todd Black so much, or she should have ended up alone, being the leader of the protest or something. Or better, she should have ended up with Namo. I said what I said. The writing. Next, I of course have to talk about the writing, which is both what made the show so great, but also created its biggest flaws as well. So we have learned from Pinucci and the screenwriters that the writing of the show was very messy. Not only was Pinucci a fan of changing the script on set, literally 5 minutes before the cameras were filming, but let's not forget that this show was one of the ones who got postponed by the pandemic, which slowed down its development quite a bit and is in part why this show filmed for basically 6 months, which is enormous considering most GMMTV shows film only during a month or two. So anyways, the issue with the show as well is that GMMTV pushed to have it air in December 2020 so it could still be considered a 2020 release. But the issue is that by that time the show was nowhere near done, and it's in fact in December that most of the staff started being present on set. Therefore, every episode was done filming and edited for release sometimes less than a week before it aired, which is not how other series function. So despite this super rushed airing, which I consider the #1 reason why the flaws in this series exist, I still think the writing is actually incredible. Pinucci, Nulek and M, the screenwriters, took a novel that barely had a plot, which already came from a GOT7 fanfiction, and not only decided to make the show about political vigilantes, which as we've already discussed was enough of a risk in itself, but created a whole world for it. And I often talk about world building in my favorite series, because I love feeling like a whole new universe was created specifically for a show and makes it stand out. Here, much like I Told Sunset About You, for which everything is perfectly calibrated to fit together, everything is connected. Sean's dad was killed by a police officer? Well, let's write Dan to be the one who shot him, making his character more layered and interesting, while also furthering the point of the show about corruption. Namo is an artist, let her be the one help Hyuk know more about Yunar, giving her more purpose as a character. There are many instances like that in the show that show how the characters influence each other. And for a script that was changed so many times, sometimes super last minute, I'm frankly extremely impressed at how good it was. Many shows that don't get made in the same chaotic conditions still don't manage to make as much sense as Not Me did most of the time. Of course, on top of these really hilarious Power Ranger jumps, there are two aspects of the writing that I didn't love. 3 if we count the plot holes that were left hanging. Personally, I did feel like the ending was satisfying enough, and in fact was more open-ended, which I love. It's not an ending that cuts off any imagination that the viewer might have about the future of the characters, but in fact it calls for us to think about what happens next. That being said, I do totally agree that the ending was rushed and not as satisfying as it could have been, which was to be expected. I honestly think this show should have been at the very least 16 episodes long, and I'm saying that as someone who is notorious for preferring shorter shows. But Not Me had such a dense and interesting plot that I honestly think it could have been 20 episodes long and still kept its momentum. It's the only show where I low-key wish it gets a second season because there is just so much more material left to explore. And if you know how much I despise second seasons and sequels, you know how crazy that statement is coming from me. So I must admit that the gang getting saved by the crowd of protesters in front of Taui's building could have been very impactful, especially now knowing it's inspired by a real event that happened in Thailand, where protesters delivered men who were arrested. But it wasn't as much as it should have been because it made no sense for Teshit, a hitman and criminal who's presented as someone who knows his ways, to drive in a crowd full of protesters he knew would be there, when he knew the car would get blocked. Besides, if he wanted to kill the guys, why bring them to Tawi in the first place? It just didn't make sense, and did lessen the impact of the final episode. That being said, even then, the fact that it's inspired by real events, and that I knew prior to the finale that there was no way of solving everything in one episode, made me still really enjoy the final episode. I wish Not Me would have gotten an extra episode to wrap it all up a little nicer, but oh well, I'll take what I can get. And the other aspect in the writing I didn't like, that I already talked about, was once again Graham as a character, but also in relation to both Black and Eugene. As I said, it really looked like they were building up towards a Graham Black story, especially in the official trailer where they clearly showed Graham telling who he thinks is Black, "I like this version of you." So I don't know what happened, but maybe they were going for Graham Black but halfway through decided against it in order not to undermine Afghanship in their eyes. In any way, that wasn't great, and most storylines surrounding Graham were frankly pretty weak. But apart from those 2 or 3 aspects, I did find the writing to be one of the strongest ever from GMMTV, because it developed each character, again except Graham, very well. Gave them very complex and layered personalities and backstories, and managed to pull so many storylines together so it could fit into a cohesive story. And that is no small feat. Not Me was not only groundbreaking in its subject matter, but also because it's a really ambitious show from a writing's perspective. And despite its flaws, I appreciate it a lot. The emotional impact. Another aspect that goes hand in hand with the writing, but that I wanted to put in a separate category because it was such an amazing aspect of the show, was the emotional impact. I'm gonna be honest, be it in BL or non-BL Thai dramas, I've already seen most of the tropes and moments play out before, which lessens their emotional impact by a lot. But firstly, because Not Me felt so new in all aspects, I didn't feel that way at all. But on top of that, I gotta say that this show absolutely excelled at creating gut-wrenching, tear-provoking moments. My 3 favorites, though there are many others, are of course in number 1, Dan's betrayal. It shouldn't have been such a surprise, but for me it completely was, because in a way I as the viewer had fallen in love with Dan in the same way that Yok did, and trusted him just like Yok did as well. So when he appeared on screen, I literally went through the 5 stages of grief right then and there, while sobbing my heart out because everyone delivered incredible performances, and the whole scene showed the injustice of it all so perfectly. So yeah, you could say that the emotional impact was definitely there. It was so there in fact that for the next couple hours after the end of that episode, I was convinced we would never see Dan again and that this had been the end of his storyline. Until I regained somewhat of a conscious brain and realized that it couldn't just end here. The other super great emotionally impactful moment that I love was, of course, Black beating Sean up, which is contrasted by Sean beating Danyok up easily earlier in the episode, showing once and for all how much he loves White and is devoted to him. That scene hurts because while it doesn't fully make sense that Sean didn't realize that the Black he'd fallen in love with had changed, it made for an absolutely heart-wrenching moment, coupled with again stunning performances from Afghan, a gorgeous location, and a perfect choice of song as always. The last emotionally impactful moment I want to talk about in details is of course the scene at the back of the van in the last episode, when the whole gang think they're gonna die. Pinucci really took a very original and artistic approach to this scene and it really worked. Even though I knew that there was no way they would die, I still felt the distress of the situation. And Danyok sobbing while talking about his mom, and Goompa, who had always seemed very collected, shedding his very first and only tears of the show, really gave me chills. The direction of that scene was absolutely incredible. And the fact is that almost every episode has these super emotionally impactful scenes. White hallucinating his brother and crying in episode 2, White betraying Sean in episode 6, which frankly that entire episode is a masterpiece, Sean confronting Tawi, Black and Todd standoffs, and many others. This is one of the rare shows that made me feel something, not just once or twice, but continuously and every single episode. And that definitely deserves to be praised. The pace. Similarly to being able to keep a significant emotional impact throughout the whole show, I do think the pace of Not Me was really good. I've seen some people say the show was too slow, which I truly can't even begin to conceive, when it packed more storylines in that one show than 5 or 6 other BL shows combined. I've also seen some people say that episode 1 was boring, which I literally cannot comprehend either, considering it ends on White being dropped into a mission he knows nothing about. So I don't think there can be a better cliffhanger to the first episode, to be honest. And some also complained about episodes 3, 4 and 5 being repetitive and boring, which I once again don't fully agree. It's true that those episodes are definitely the least interesting from the whole show. That being said, they're still very interesting and are essential to set up the other storylines in a way that makes all of the other episodes after all of these 3 absolute bangers. So once again, I don't really see where those people are coming from. In my opinion, the pace of Not Me was insane. As I said, the show was kind of rushed through filming and editing, and it does show up in the finished show, but in a good way. There is this sense of urgency throughout the whole show that shows up through the number of storylines there is to solve. Every time one question is answered, it feels like 5 more have popped up. This not only keeps the viewer deeply invested and even thinking about the show constantly between the episodes, but it makes the show so freaking entertaining. There wasn't one second when I felt remotely bored during it, except the Graham Eugene storyline. I was frankly so invested into the show because the pace was so good and perfectly completed its other elements. Chemistry and Sean White. So I'll keep it short because this video is already way too long, but the chemistry was incredible, and frankly some of the best I've ever seen. It's not surprising since I told you the acting was great, but it actually happens that great actors still don't have chemistry together. For Afghan, who have been working together for 6 years, it wasn't really about whether or not there would be chemistry, but how it would show up. And it's mostly down to the writing and directing of the show mixed with Afghan's acting and natural chemistry, but they nailed it. One of my biggest pet peeves in BL shows is the often weird chemistry there is between the actors, but here it wasn't the case at all. First of all, once again, I think the writing and directing did a lot to make both Sean White and Danyok, because once again, I cannot ignore Graham Eugene, feel so natural together. Sean White's first time scene, for example, is frankly one of the most beautiful sex scenes I've ever seen, because it meant something. It wasn't just gratuitous sex like a lot of BL shows often have. It also showed awkwardness, hesitation, and the feelings of the characters perfectly. It felt real. And all of the other scenes Sean White had felt like that, especially the kissing scene in the garage that felt so genuine. For me, the writing and directing of this show truly allowed Afghan to get their best chemistry yet, which was incredible since they already had a great one prior to the show. It really participated into this idea that the show built up that Sean and White are soulmates. As for Danyok, I don't have much to add because their chemistry was just as good, and the directing they got didn't make them feel like a side chick at all because they were absolutely incredible. Danyok. Speaking of Danyok, I need to talk about how great they were because while I'm more of a Sean White girly myself, I gotta say that I still love this side ship so freaking much. Not only are they basically developed like a full-on main ship, but they are as compelling as Sean White. Usually, full transparency, I feel like most side ships are kind of forced and just there to fill up the screen time. The only time I usually care for side ships, they gotta be really special, and the main ship is usually pretty boring in comparison. But here it's really not the case, and I feel like Danyok have a very similar vibe to Sean White, but in a different font if you will. Both ships have this we shouldn't be together sort of aspect to them, and both ships are built up like soulmates. But they obviously have different personalities and dynamics which still make them stand out. It was the same thing for Kitered and Unto Interior of Love, though Unto ended up becoming my favorite ship, who had pretty similarly angsty stories about one-sided crushes and repressed feelings. And I find that these dynamics make both ships work really well respectively. And if you like one, you'll probably like the other. So I really enjoyed Danyok. Like, I think now my 3 favorite ships are in order Sean White, Unto, and Danyok. That's how much they mean to it. Their story, emotional build-up, acting, chemistry, characterization was definitely the best I've ever seen for a side ship. They even technically started way earlier than Sean White in the show, so cheers to them honestly. The cinematography. Next, of course, and I probably shouldn't have waited that long to say it, the cinematography is incredible. I mean, Not Me is directed by a renowned award-winning director after all, so it's not surprising. But it truly looks like no other show, with this raw beauty that cannot be replicated. Pinucci's style really fit the show, with her textured walls and urban locations, fitting Not Me's subject matter of social inequalities perfectly. It wasn't a fancy show, but seeing its topic, we would have never expected it to be. It all just fit together in a cohesive ensemble, and I loved every single scene from a visual standpoint because they're so different from anything I've seen before. The locations. Hand in hand in that, we have the locations. That truly feels so original compared to other Thai dramas. Sure, the show still used the same university as Theory of Love, which did make me scream in the first episode, but apart from that, it really presented a new side of Bangkok that I had never seen before. Showing houses by the waterside, poorer areas, the highway, abandoned buildings. This very urban and industrial aesthetic, as I said, just worked for the show. And I love seeing such a new side to a city that we've seen again and again from the same angles in other series. It truly served to show the diversity of Bangkok, which has so many different sides to it, and served to make the show stand out once more. The soundtrack. Then of course I need to talk about the soundtrack. I've created a playlist of all the songs with lyrics from the show, it will be listed in the description, and I'm gonna be honest when I say that this is the first time I listen to the full playlist of a show on repeat and genuinely fully enjoys it. I do think most Thai original soundtracks are great, especially from GMM shows, but here it's the fact that most songs except the 2 original ones are literally from a music library. Because yes, on top of the show not being promoted at all, GMM also cut their budget for an original soundtrack. While F4 Thailand got approximately 15 different original songs, but anyway we knew that GMM plays favorites. Yet this soundtrack is not only a full-ass bop, and heightens every moment of the series super well, but it's also super unique for Thai shows that usually don't have many English-speaking songs, if any. But here the whole sound of the series that contains rock and indie music and folk and many other types of songs all fit together so well, and truly makes the Not Me soundtrack one of the best I've ever heard from a Thai show. All of that with the budget that was cut. Absolutely incredible. The costume design. I also need to talk about the costume design, which I don't talk about a lot because there's really an outstanding one in Thai dramas, most of them being set in high school or university where the characters wear uniforms. But the thing with costume design is that it's not only about the outfits being cute, it's about telling us more about the story and characters, which is something that Not Me is one of the rare Thai dramas to do. Sean almost always wears the same outfit consisting of the same shoes, the same 2 pairs of skinny jeans, a basic t-shirt and a khaki jacket, to show that he is from the lower class and he is the only one sustaining himself. Sean is the poorest character of the show, and so he doesn't have the luxury to care about fashion or have multiple pairs of shoes. Black's wardrobe is the prettiest in my opinion, with custom painted jackets and a lot of layering, completing his very badass image that this show created. White's wardrobe, in contrast, be it when he dresses more formal or more casual once he joins the gang, is still mostly light yellow and creamy tones, which contrast a lot with the rest of the gang and make him stand out. Graham and Yok both have very cool wardrobes that make them look like cartoon characters. Graham with layering graphic t-shirts on top of long sleeves one, reflecting his passionate and loud personality with the designs of his t-shirts, and Yok wearing baggier clothes and a lot of tiny tank tops to show off his tattoos and his himbo side, accompanied by his trusty shoulder bag to fit in all of his art supplies. Namo also has a super cool wardrobe that's a bit more masculine and is meant to show how cool and badass she is. Eugene has a sportier wardrobe, but I was really happy to see a female character show more skin than usual and not be shamed for it. She had a really cool wardrobe as well. And Dan and Toad's wardrobe were also great for the characters as well. So for me it was truly an amazing costume design job that furthered the plot and really completed the characters. The art. And finally, I want to touch on quickly on how important art is in the show. As someone who is studying to get into the art world, I absolutely love this aspect of the show, and you can really tell it's made by a director who loves art. We have firstly the rapping by Rap Against Dictatorship, which is an absolutely chilling scene, accompanied by a dancer who also made Thai headlines for hitting himself to represent the suffering of the underprivileged. We have the artist who painted Yunor's painting, who's himself an anonymous Thai artist who criticizes politicians through his drawings, so he's truly the real-life Yunar. Then there's also the whole style of proletariat expressionism that Yok uses for his thesis, which is also very much in line with the message of the show. And then there's the many contemporary dances that Eugene does throughout the show that are also very captivating and even used during the protest scenes. Not only is art a huge part of the show, but it's also shown to be a huge part of protesting inequality as well. And since art has always been used to not only record history, but also contest it since its very inception, I really love that aspect of the show as well. To conclude, I have a lot of annoyance and pain when I see how grossly underrated Not Me is, though that will be for another video. One thing truly comforts me though. In a world where BL shows are consumed faster than a McDonald's order and get forgotten almost as quickly, there will never be another show like Not Me. This show is completely unique in its direction and topic of choice, and the fact that it even got made with 2 cameras, a tiny budget, and despite the fact that it really wasn't an easy sell like other BL shows, is already a miracle. Even though most shows get forgotten as BL audiences rush along to the next big ship, the societal and artistic impact of Not Me will never disappear. I could never forget a show like this one, and in fact I don't want to. Not Me is not only the most daring and important Thai drama ever made, but it also meant a lot to people. I saw how much passion this show brought to people when they were discussing it, making up theories, crying over it. That was a passion that I had thought was long gone in the BL fandom, that I thought I had personally lost for the BL genre as a whole. And I'll always remember that passion, just like I remember Not Me for the trailblazer, unique piece of art that it is. And gosh, does it mean quite a lot to me. I hope you enjoyed this video, I'll see you next time, and have a great day.